You're watching BCTV, Branford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford.
Okay, we're going to get started. Board of Finance regular meeting, May 21st, 2018, Town of Branford. And first on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the February 26th, March 12th, March 15th, March 19th, March 26th, and April 9th meetings.
I'll move that all 6 minutes be approved.
Second.
Motion's been made and second. Are there discussion, amendments? All in favor?
Aye.
Next is citizens' comments. We ordinarily allocate 10 minutes for members from the public to comment on any of the agenda items. With no takers, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, to hear a presentation from GYL Financial Synergies and Hightower Advisors with regards to the performance of the town's volunteer fire pension fund for the quarter ending March 31st, 2018, and if necessary, rebalance the portfolio. We'll also hear from the same folks with regards to the police pension fund and with regards to the other post-employment benefits, the OPEB funds. So that's agenda items 3, 4, and 5. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good evening. So, as is customary, I'm going to go through a recap of the economy and the market events over the last quarter and year to date. And Luke is here in place of Michael tonight, and he'll go over the performance and experience of the 3 funds as outlined in agenda items 3, 4, and 5. As we've gone through the first part of 2018, we've seen a big increase in volatility in the markets, both the stock market domestically, overseas, as well as in the fixed income markets. To translate that into numbers, during the month of February, as we may recall from our last meeting, we did experience about a 10% correction in the U.S. equity market. The markets then rallied back from that and then experienced another 7% decline and then rallied back from that. So we've seen this increase in volatility in the U.S. equity markets for the first quarter as well as year to date. One of the drivers of it, of many things, is the way and the rhetoric that comes out of Washington and how that's perceived in the markets and how the markets are reacting to that. When we look further under the hood of the markets and the economy, we are seeing corporate profits expanding. We are seeing that the changes to the tax code, while they're starting to appear to be priced into the market a little bit, it's not reflected in the bottom line of corporations. So corporate profits continue to expand, earnings are expanding, and at that same time, prices have not yet to expand as much. And we're actually seeing the market trading a little bit cheaper than it was on a PE multiple basis than it was several months ago, as a function of the growth in earnings. So kind of interesting to note that at the end of March, the U.S. equity market was negative 0.75%, and year to date, the U.S. equity market is up 2.25%. So we've seen an interesting change over the last 45 days since the end of the quarter, and this is part of that increased volatility that we're seeing in the stock and bond market. When I refer to the bond market volatility, we've seen shorter-term interest rates continue to rise lockstep with the Federal Reserve. As in March, they raised the overnight lending rate by another 0.25 point to 1.75 as the upper bound on the Fed funds target. The expectation is for another rate increase in June and possibly in September, and then one additional one expected by year end. So currently we're seeing an expectation of continued economic growth, a pickup in inflation and wage inflation, and unemployment being at or below the 4% mark. The Fed feels they're at or near their ideal targets. So we expect them to continue to unwind that very easy policy they've had in place for a number of years and start to progress back towards something that's more historically normal. What is also interesting inside of the equity markets, just to bounce back there a second, is that year to date, I mentioned that the U.S. equity market's up 2.25%. That's really the large U.S. equities. However, small U.S. equities are outperforming that significantly. We're seeing a meaningful movement in small U.S. equities, and that's benefiting all the various funds. So with that, I'm going to let Luke jump into the experience of the fund, and then we could talk a little bit more where we need to specifically.
Thanks.
All right, good evening. If you would all, in your packet, turn into the first section. I'm going to point you to page 21. That's where we'll start. So we'll be starting with the Town of Branford Police Pension Plan, page 21.
Got it.
Okay. If you take a look to the table on the upper right-hand side, the risk return statistics, you can see here, the fourth one down, our annualized return. This dates back to April of 2003. We have a return of positive 5.77. Slightly outperforming the benchmark to the right there, 5.73 of the policy. Dovetailing with that, you have 10% less volatility as measured by the statistic beta right below, where you can see the 0.9. And just below that, we also have alpha. So on a risk-adjusted basis, you're seeing about 5 basis points of alpha. Putting all this in dollars and cents, if you look at the table at the bottom of the page, summary of cash flows, to the far right, you'll see inception of April 1st, 2003. We started with a market value of $8,311,293. You then have your contributions and withdrawals. That are actual contributions to the plan, benefit payments, and all rebalancing activity. Your net cash flow is $687,918. And then you can see the net investment change of $13,891,585. Moving back to page 18, we're going to take a review of the more near-term performance of the police plan. As of the close of March 31st, 2018, the plan had a market value of $22,890,796, running from left to right across the blue line. The plan for the quarter had negative 1.57 return versus the applicable benchmark of negative 1.53. Trailing 1 year, positive 4.97 versus positive 5.22. The 3 year, positive 3.68 versus positive 4.15. The 5 year, positive 4.46 versus positive 4.84. And then closing that gap as you enter the 10 year, 5.1 versus positive 5.19. And then dating back to the inception of the plan, April 2003, 5.77 versus 5.73. What I'd like to note, obviously, Branford has embraced more of a conservative approach. We use a mix of the mandates for the fixed income and high yield, which are managed by Mesro Financial. All the equities are passively indexed, ETFs. So we've been overweight at times in cash as we dollar cost average, and that has played in the favor of the plan over the longer time periods. And also, as you may recall, at the last pension meeting, we adopted the 55-45 allocation in the police plan. Historically, it was a 45% equity, 55% fixed income. If there is anything else, I wanted to let you know, as of last Friday, May 18th, the police pension plan currently has a market value of $23,847,751. This, when you net out contributions and withdrawals, is in excess of about $220,000 since quarter end, roughly 1%.
So even though we have a negative return for the past 3 months, we are ahead of our policy.
Are you
Overall, or this is
We're in line with the policy for the first quarter at a negative 1.57 versus negative 1.53.
Right, so we should be happy with a negative return because at least we're better than our policy.
We're in line with the policy. It was a negative return in the overall global equity markets in the first quarter, which we've seen that trend reverse over the last 45 days. And that's a function of the quite a increased level of volatility that we've seen.
We're positive as of May 18th, right? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes. Yes. So we actually received a cash contribution as of last week in the amount of $995,000 into the plan. We intend to allocate those dollars across the current lineup that's in place, but this will not be a material rebalance in any nature. We will then reassess the plan prior to the August meeting, as we typically receive the annual contribution in mid-July. At that time, we might motion to rebalance the plan accordingly.
Okay, questions on the police pension? You all set?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, thanks, Luke.
We'll move forward next to the volunteer fire incentive plan. We're going to flip right to page 21 as well. Just highlight some of the statistics we covered. All right, same table, risk return statistics on the upper right. You could see this plan has a shorter duration. It was commingled with the police pension originally, but we broke it out in December of 2015. The annualized return here was a positive 6.51. The policy had a 6.63. You could see we also reduced volatility here with a beta of 0.9, so taking on 10% less risk of the overall market or plan policy, while achieving and translating to a positive alpha of 4 basis points. Down below in the summary of cash flows, same concept. We started back in December of 2015 with $55,973. After all contributions, withdrawals, and rebalancing, we had a net cash flow of $831,000 and a net investment change of $128,854. And if you could flip back to page 18, we'll look at the short-term, near-term performance of the plan. This plan, as well as the police pension, adopted the 55-45 mandate at the last meeting back in February. Running across the blue line, you could see at the close of the first quarter, ending March 31st, we had a plan value of $1,016,820. For the nearest 3 months, negative 1.7, trailing the benchmark of negative 1.55. For the trailing 1 year, a positive 4.95 versus positive 5.16. And then dating back to inception of December of 2015, closing that gap at a 6.51 versus 6.63. In terms of the current plan market value, as of this past Friday, the plan sits at $1,019,002. After contributions and withdrawals, this is a positive gain of about $2,100 since quarter end. But other than that, the policy and the plan is right in line with its targets, so there's no motion to rebalance or adjust whatsoever at this time.
Okay, questions on the fire, Charlie?
Listen, could you give me a refresher on the beta factor again?
On beta factor?
Yeah, why, is 0.9 better than, in other words, are in less risk with a 0.9?
Yes, so the
Okay.
market generally is a 1, so anything lower than 1, you're taking on less risk. The portfolio, less volatility.
Okay.
And by the market, Luke is referring to the benchmark that you're assigning to, so that is the policy of the pension. So that benchmark is the 1, and the actual experience is less volatility than what our benchmark is.
Thanks.
No, great question. If there are no further questions.
Any other questions on this? Move to the OPEB.
Okay. And for the last and final plan, we'll flip to page 21 as well. right, so just to refresh, the OPEB plan had the 55-45 mandate all along, whereas the two other plans were recently transitioned. This one had a greater allocation to equities, so 55% equities, 45% fixed income, and you're going to see that within some of these statistics I speak to. So within the risk return statistics, you can see the annualized return for the plan was 5.53 versus the policy of a 5.43, and that dates back to July of 2011. Charlie, as you were just asking, the beta on this plan is actually 0.75. So that's 25% less than the overall market or the plan policy that's in place. And while doing so, we were able to add 12 basis points of alpha. The inception category down below in the summary of cash flows, you can see starting at $4,030,671. Minus out your contributions and withdrawals, you have a net cash flow of $6,933,525. And the net investment change over this period was $3,344,450. Flipping back to the performance on page 18, we have at the conclusion of March 31st a plan value of $14,308,646. The recent 3-month return was a negative 1.24 versus a negative 1.36. Over the 1 year, a positive 5.87 versus a positive 6.04. 3-year, 4.29 versus 4.62. The 5-year time period, 4.99 versus 5.34, and closing that gap and actually beating the benchmark to its inception date, 5.53 to a 5.43. The plan currently, as of this past Friday, it is at a market value of $14,508,000, and this is an increase from the quarter end of approximately $199,000, which is roughly 1.4%.
Okay, questions on the OPEB trust? Not. I think we're all set. No need to rebalance or resolutions, so.
The OPEB as well, we are anticipating a contribution, I believe in the amount of $785,000 sometime this week. We'll allocate that accordingly to the plan, but at this time, no material rebounds till we reassess come the summer.
Okay. Charlie?
So are all three of these funds, are they all 55-45?
They are today, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Next is to consider and if appropriate, approve request from registrar voters for the following budget transfer from election workers, $3,900, into advertising and printing, $1,210, and into other supplies, $2,700. Welcome, Marion.
Good evening. This transfer, we did it within our budget, and this transfer is to cover the additional printing and mailing of the voter change letters that we had to do for the change in the District 1 polling location for the community house to the high school, and then we found out in April that we had to or we couldn't use WIS for the 7th district, so we've moved that now to Mary Tisco. And we did have to notify the voters in that district 90 days before the August 14th primary that's coming very fast. So we had to move fast on getting some things done.
Sure. Okay, questions for Marion?
I'll move it, Joe.
Been moved by Jeff,
Second?
second by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is to consider and if appropriate approve a request from Human Services Director for the following transfer from property and general liability, $2,000, into purchase services, $2,000. Welcome, Peter.
Right, Joe. January, the state said that we had to have our prescribers use electronic prescription method. So for us to do that, we had to incur the costs. Each prescriber had to be charged, we had to charge each person $90. And with the number of people that we have, we're going to have a shortfall of about $2,000. So I'm going to take that from the liability insurance. We have a surplus in that, and just move it over to purchase services.
Gotcha. Questions from Peter? Moved by Victor.
Second.
Second by Charlie. Is there discussion? All in favor? Thank you.
Thanks.
Next up is to consider and if appropriate approve a request from the Solid Waste Management Commission to award the collection of municipal solid waste and recycling bid to Hometown Waste LLC of Clinton, Connecticut for fiscal years 19-20-21 at the cost of the town per the table below, with the option for 2 additional 1-year extensions. The total for the 3 years is $3,127,320. Fiscal year 19 is $1,020,000. Fiscal 20 is $1,042,000. And fiscal 21 is $1,064,000, with the optional year $1,087,000, and the second optional year $1,109,000. Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, this was a bid we put out back in December, opened in January, and this is the lone bidder, Hometown Waste, who's currently the trash collector that we have now. The commission took some time to look at some alternatives, different ways of collecting, different ways of segregating the trash and recycling at the curbside. And this bid here is an ultimate decision to stay with the course that we have. We still have manual pickup, manual collection of trash and recycling as we do now. And this price that's shown is the price that we used for the budget.
Okay. Questions on this? Charlie?
Hey, Dan, in the contract, in the extension years, does the contract allow for a rebidding?
Yes, the contract that was bid was for a 3-year contract with
Right.
2 optional years. So, yeah, in those years we can go out to bid rather than choose those options.
So we could challenge those numbers.
Correct.
Right in the optional years.
Correct.
Okay.
Dan, what does this do? Am I confused about the other methodology you were anticipating, the single stream or?
This looked at single stream recycling or automated collection or different options like that. The automated where the arm comes and picks it up with the big toters. It looked at those things. It didn't look at the smart presentation that we presented early on in the budgetary process, with the different kinds of bags and whatnot, where the woman from DEP and Waste Zero came.
So that got rejected by the commission?
It didn't get rejected. It's just it's working its way through the different phases. That is still going through. The options of going with single stream recycling or the mixed recycling or going with the automated arms or anything like that, that was chosen not to move forward with at this point.
Okay. Jamie, anything else on that?
Well, I was just going to follow up with Dan was mentioning about the smart presentation that was done. That was part of, my understanding, it's a multi-phase process that this company goes through, and they are under a contract with DEEP. I believe the commission just voted to go through the second phase of that and solicit a grant, I believe, to go through that second phase. So the length of that process to evaluate if that's truly the direction we want to go didn't align with our contract that we have here. However, myself, the commission, Dan, continue to explore what the future for our trash collection ought to be. What's the best value? So as of now, we're holding status quo. We did meet with the current vendor who is, they know we're exploring other options as well and interested.
But for now, they have a 3-year contract.
Right now, we opted to just go into 3-year contract because by the time we were to truly evaluate and then implement a new program, we would be probably coming to the end of that contract.
Somebody want to move this?
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded for discussion.
Yeah, just one question,
Bob?
Joe.
Sure.
If we decide, Dan, to opt out in the third, going into the fourth year, is there any penalties that we would have to pay?
No, it's only a 3-year contract. It's
And we have the option.
it's the town option.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next on the agenda is to award and if appropriate approve a request from Solid Waste Management Commission to award the hauling of newspaper bottles, cans, and cardboard bid to All American Waste LLC of Enfield, Connecticut, as per haul cost of the town is shown below table for fiscal 19-20-21 with optional 2 1-year extensions. So for fiscal 19, you've got newspaper, $175. Is that a ton?
That's a per haul.
Per haul. Goes up to $185 in the third year. Bottles and cans is at $245 a haul, going up to $259 in the third year. And cardboard at $175 for fiscal 19, going up to $185 for the third year. Dan, you want to expand on that at all?
These are this is the hauling portion of the bids that we were here a few weeks ago at one of our last meetings to determine what the facilities that would receive these materials. And so we went out to bid for someone to take the dumpsters that we fill at the transfer station to those respective facilities. This was All American Waste, was the lone bidder that responded. They actually haul our newspaper and cardboard for the past at least 5 years, so they're the incumbent. And these prices are a little bit more than we're paying now, but they should fall within the. We're not at this point seeing a need to be requesting additional funding, and I think we'll fall within the what was appropriated.
Thanks, Dan. Questions? Charlie?
Hey, Dan, I just wonder, heck, do you have a feel as to why we only have one bidder for each of the kinds of trash?
No, I don't. And this one actually was shocking because the bidder who does our bottles and cans currently didn't put forth a bid. And the company who did it prior to that company taking over didn't put in a bid. I kind of at a loss as to why we didn't get a response from those companies or anybody else.
Okay, other questions?
I'll move it.
Moved by Bob,
Second.
second by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Abstain. Next is to consider and if appropriate approve a request from the finance director of the following budget transfer from property insurance, $30,000, into insurance damage, $30,000. Jim?
Okay, as you can see from my attached letter, I'm looking for $30,000, which supplements the current budget of $75,000. The account is over by $8,426. We still have another month and a half to go throughout the year, so that would give us a cushion of $21,574. Just for the record, and I know we've presented on this in the past, but the insurance damage includes a variety of things. There's damage to town property, and then there's the replacing of vehicles. There's deductibles for lawsuits. So, so out of the money that's either spent or encumbered, roughly about $48,000 of that is for deductibles on suits against the town, and there's about $33,000 to replace a vehicle and equip it, and then the others are relatively smaller things. Somebody hits a car, and we have to replace a fender or headlights rather. So again, these are things that when we're out there, our vehicles are out there. Sometimes they get hit, and then sometimes people don't like some of the things we do, and they sue us. So
Not an extraordinary year.
it seems like we're adding to this account every year. We do get some recoveries. I don't have the number off the top of my head in terms of what the recoveries are. I could go back and look, but I do remember in other years adding to this. And again, the $21,574 is a cushion, so if that doesn't get used, it would probably be a little less extraordinary. But.
Thanks, Jim. Questions from Jim?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Victor.
Jeff. I'll second.
What's his name? Jeff. Second by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, number 11 is to consider and if appropriate, to hear a presentation of the finance director to approve the following fund transfers using budget debt service funds to offset the need to borrow for the following projects. So it'd be coming from general fund principal, general purpose of $1 million, and also principal for schools, and going into a transfer out to the Municipal Facilities Fund of $1 million and transferring out to the Board of Ed Facilities Fund of $19,000. The corresponding transfers inside those individual funds would be a bond proceeds for Indian Neck Firehouse, $1 million, and then transfer into Indian Neck Firehouse of $1 million corresponding those, and likewise a offsetting $19,000 locker room transfer in and authorization for the expenditure of the $19,000 for the locker room. And those, Jim, do you want to walk through your letter that's a little more in detail?
Yeah, and I apologize. It's a little bit of an aggressive memo. It's trying to do a lot of things that are related, but I'll try to
Maybe take the
present it in a way that makes the most sense. And if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. I thought it was important to kind of go back in history a little bit and to kind of put this in context as to why we're doing this and why we're able to do this. When we look back at where we were a year ago, the state hadn't adopted its budget. The governor had proposed a plan in which they were talking about zeroing out effectively Branford state aid. We were getting, there was a plan for us to essentially cover the cost of the share of TRB, 10% share of the Teachers Retirement Board. There was talk about the excess costs being eliminated, and so there was a lot of things that we were faced with. And one of the things that we talked about back then is, well, how do we basically insulate the taxpayer? And what we did is we increased our fund balance to $6.4 million, and by doing that, we lowered the tax rate to 3.85%, and we essentially said, okay, we're only going to send out one set of tax bills. Other communities were basically posting that they weren't sure if they were going to do supplemental tax bills. And essentially, it put us in a position where we became spectators of the state budget process as opposed to stakeholders, because we basically only budgeted about $89,000 in state aid. And I do have kind of a cheat sheet which I could kind of pass out that kind of shows, where we were at then. So one of the points I want to make is, where were we and where are we? Okay, so if you look, I said if you look on the revenue side, I was talking about how we budgeted $89,000 for state aid. So virtually, no state aid. Looking at what we're projecting, and here we are into mid-May, things ended up being better than our worst case scenario, and we had kind of hoped that would be the case, that we would do better than the worst case scenario. So you can see, I won't go into every one of these categories, but you can see that the revenue gain was about $2.486 million. So we did better on the revenues than we thought we would. On the expenditure side, which relates to some of the bullet points in the memo, you saw that we had basically split the TRB component. We essentially had half in a line that was called teachers' retirement. And then we also put $1,370,000 into the debt service. And the thinking at the time was that if the TRB didn't happen, some of the money that we were effectively taxing for, we would use to reduce debt. And at the time, we had notes that were outstanding, bond anticipation notes. Those notes were coming due in September. However, the budget wasn't adopted, the state budget wasn't adopted till October. So it wasn't prudent for us to basically pay down those notes. Another thing that we had thought about, because we had done it in the past and this board and the RTM had approved it, is do we pay down a clean water fund note? A lot of the sewer improvements were financed through the state of Connecticut's Clean Water Fund. That's a program in which the interest rate is 2%, and so you amortize that monthly at a rate of 2%. Our last bond issue, so there was some thought of paying that down. Currently, interest rates are higher than that now. So if we were to go out and borrow money, we'd probably be looking at a true interest cost of just north of 3.5%. So part of the thinking is that we say to ourselves, well, we did better on the revenue side, and so let's take some of that expenditure benefits and let's allocate those. So if you see in the right-hand column, the police pension contribution, we basically, a few months back, we put $1 million additional into the pension plan. That did two things. That improved our funded ratio, and it also reduced our tax requirements going forward. So that was one of the benefits of that. And then the second piece relates to the $1,019,000. And the $1,019,000 basically is really two components. There's one that you haven't heard yet. It's later on the agenda. That's a Board of Education redesignation for the locker rooms, which is a total project in the capital plan that went through this board and the RTM of $300,000. So there's a $281,000 redesignation later on the agenda. And then the balance of that was in the plan to be used for debt. So small amount. This proposal that I have here would basically take that out. So we would basically not be borrowing $1,019,000 that was previously either authorized or contemplated in the capital plan. And the reason we're doing that is because we're using our good fortune in terms of where we ended up relative to what we had planned, and trying to be good stewards of that money and then using it to reduce future liabilities. One on the pension side, and the other is in terms of borrowing future debt. So this is really kind of a one-off for this year because it worked out, as I said earlier, better than we thought. I don't think any of us are naive to think that because things are quiet, that the state's financial situation has improved. Actually, they got downgraded recently, and so we know that those challenges still exist. However, we thought these would be good investments in the future, basically reducing our liability. Now, granted, in terms of the overall capital plan, the $1,019,000 is probably a small amount, but it's a positive step. And then on the pension side, you invest $1 million, you're getting an actuarial benefit of 6.5% a year. So those are some of the other reasons why we did that. So that's sort of my long-winded way of saying that a year ago things were looking a lot worse. We planned for it. Things were better, and we're taking that good fortune and trying to be good stewards of those dollars and put ourselves in a position to be stronger down the road.
Thanks, Jim. Questions on these transfers? Charlie?
Jim, have we ever, or the Pequot and Mohegan grants, are they new or has that always been?
No, those have been around quite a while. That was like the slot machine money?
90s.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but the state collects from the tribes.
Right.
But they then decide what town or city gets how much?
Yeah, they carve out the slot revenues, and then they have a formula that goes to the towns.
Okay.
Okay, other questions on the transfers?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Robert,
Second.
second by Victor. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, next, we'll get back to some of that, but for now, we're going to talk about item number 12, which is to hear a request from the Finance Director pursuant to 42-1 of the Code for a positive recommendation to the Board of Selectmen regarding approval of a 3-year extension of our existing agreement with Tyler Technologies, which is the provider of the Munis financial systems for Town and Board of Ed. We have a letter from Jim, and I know Catherine had been involved with this, so there is a proposed resolution that I'll read. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the Board of Selectmen approve a 3-year extension of our current agreement with Tyler Technologies. So that's just out there. I'll read it again, but Jim, you want to hit this for us?
Yeah, and I'll just hit sort of like the highlights. Last month when we were before the Board of Finance, we were talking about, some of the challenges we had with, implementing our new software, but yet there were some positive aspects to that, and that in the end we could get a solution that worked better for us. And you may recall at that meeting, it was myself, Catherine, Don Neal from the Board of Education, and our IT folks. What we did here is myself, Catherine, and Don Neal, we basically put together, the highlights, some of the things that are actually better with the system. The other thing is, we identified that, we would need an additional $37,000. I think I looked back and I joked to you, Dennis, I said, well, maybe the RTM could help us out. Fortunately, the Administrative Services Committee had not acted on their recommendations to the full RTM. So myself, Catherine, and Debbie Karen went back to them, and we basically made a case to amend the budget by $37,000. That was an adjustment that the RTM adopted as part of their final appropriations. And then the other piece we were talking about was some of the startup costs. I believe the number was, $25,000 roughly? And that was something we were partnering with the Board of Ed, and that the Board of Ed would basically, fund some of those startup costs. So on a positive note, what was a challenging situation, I think you can make a fair case, resulted in a happy ending going forward, and we were able to accomplish that in the budget that takes effect July 1st, and again, then the Board of Ed basically stepped up and identified some funds to help us in terms of between now and July 1st. So,
Jim, just for reference, how many towns in Connecticut are using this software?
I would say at least half, but I don't know the exact numbers.
They said about 40 currently.
More than that, isn't it?
Okay.
There's 700 of their clients that are using SaaS.
Around the country.
But about 40 are in Connecticut.
Well, do you mean Munis or just the SAS?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you meant
The Munis.
Oh, Munis? Oh. I would say probably 85% of Connecticut.
Yeah, more.
Okay.
Yeah, just more than half. I thought you meant SaaS.
Right. So 40 in Connecticut are using the SAS, but the market is basically the Tyler's Munis product. Okay. Charlie?
So I'm unfamiliar with a couple of terms, so you got to bear with me. What are data cubes and pivot tables?
I guess probably the best way to explain that, those are Excel features. So Microsoft Excel, does that. And one of the things is I don't use it, but I'm aware of it. And the software interfaces well with Excel, so you can take data out of the financial system and put it into these pivot tables.
Oh. And what's a pivot table?
Lets it manipulate large amounts of data in a worksheet.
Okay.
Really.
Things that you necessarily wouldn't be able to get from a standard report. You can pull little pieces from each file and then merge the data for what
Oh.
you need it for.
Okay, other questions with regards to this request? And I'll read the motion again. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends that the Board of Selectmen approve a 3-year extension of our current agreement with Tyler Technologies.
Is that the number?
It's $97,000 annually, yes, $97,296.
I'll move it. Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Board of Ed, for that. Next is to consider and act on the following proposed resolution. Resolution amending a resolution appropriating $1,625,000 for the Board of Education Capital Improvement Program for 2015-16 and authorizing the issuance of $1,625,000 in bonds of the town to meet said appropriation and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowings for such purpose. Purpose of this amendment is to decrease the high school roof appropriation and bond authorization by $281,000 down to $79,000 and to add the new purpose of the Branford High School locker room renovation and appropriate $281,000 for that purpose, and to ratify, confirm, and adopt all prior authorizations and resolutions in connection therewithin, and to recommend the resolution for adoption by the representative town meeting. So before somebody wants to act on that, I'd be happy to read the entire resolution unless somebody wants to make a motion to waive that.
I'll move waive the reading of the entire resolution. Second.
Seconded by Robert. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And we have Hamlet Hernandez, Superintendent, and Jim Finch to address this issue. Jim?
Yeah. The reason we're here presenting together is it's a two-step process. We work with the Board of Education in terms of doing these redesignations, and then the board acts on it, and then I also work through this with our bond counsel to kind of put together the legalese aspects and keep the resolutions in line. As I indicated a little bit earlier in presenting a previous item, is that the capital plan identified doing locker rooms for $300,000, and it really had two components. One was the redesignation of 281, and then the other was the $19,000 would come from the item that you just approved. And I did discuss this with Don Neal, my counterpart at the Board of Education, and my kind of thinking on this was, if we believe the estimate's $300,000, let's put ourselves in a position to do a $300,000 project. I mean, we could have waited to see, well, maybe it came in at $279,000, in which the $281,000 would have been fine. But to do a debt authorization for $19,000, seemed a little bit somewhat unworkable given what I was planning with the firehouse. So essentially, the timing kind of worked out well, so that we would basically come up with a $19,000. So then I think you go back in history and say, well, okay, so how did this come about? And again, back in 2015, a lot of things came together for the town. We had done a refunding. We saved $1.6 million. We had identified some new money projects to add. You may recall that's when Branford Hill School, the appropriation was demolished, and we had some other school projects. One of those was the roof. At that time, it was a section of the roof, and the thought was it would cost roughly $250,000. And then back in 2016, we were looking at the performance contract, the Honeywell project. But the Board of Ed had indicated to us, anyway, that the rooftop units at the gymnasium could not wait for that project. So that's why it wasn't part of the $6 million. And so at that time, we added $110,000 to that because there was an estimate as that might be what it cost. Then when it went out to bid, it came in at $79,000. And then the other question that needs to be answered then is, okay, well, what then happens to the roof? And basically in the capital plan as presented to the board in the RTM, there's $1.3 million for the roof and 2021. So essentially, we're basically getting the locker room done between the 281 and the 19,000, and then we'll do a more comprehensive repair to the roof in 2021, and then that'll be money that we'll have to borrow at that point.
So we can wait until 2021 for the roof?
I believe we can. The crew does an exceptional job in maintaining it, making sure that they address any issue that we have. I mean, it certainly will need attention by then, but that's based on Mr. Carbone's recommendation, as well as the experts that he brings in to inspect the roof.
Thanks, Ian. Questions on this request from either Jim or Hamlet? Somebody want to move it?
I'll move it.
Moved by Charlie, seconded by Lorraine. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. I think you gentlemen did well. Thank you. Next is to, number 14 is to hear an overview of the fiscal year 2018-19 budget from the Finance Director.
Okay. For those who are somewhat new to Branford, which probably isn't most people, but if you're wondering how the budget process works, one of the things that the Board of Finance makes a recommendation to the RTM can make changes to the budget. They can decrease it, but they can't increase it. And then pursuant to those changes, the Board of Finance comes back and sets the mill rate. This year, the changes that were made by the various RTM committees and later adopted by the full RTM totaled $106,581. One of the things that I alluded to earlier was the $37,000 in the IT budget for the software as a service with our Munis vendor. One of the reductions that was made by Administrative Services was to reduce the Human Services, which is our counseling center budget, by $37,000 and change. The Education Committee recommended a reduction to Blackstone Memorial Library. It was a larger reduction during the budget deliberations. There was a bargain struck, and it ended up being a little bit less than that. And you can see on the list of $9,851. And perhaps under the topic of usual suspects, police overtime was reduced by $20,000, and then the contingency was also reduced. Part of that was. We had budgeted for a primary, and the Registrar of Voters had budgeted for a primary as well, so that was a piece of it. And then the other was just an overall sense that from the RTM that the town could live with a smaller contingency. So again, those were the reductions that the RTM made, and those were the reasons for it, essentially.
Thanks, Jim. Any questions on the $106,581? That was Charlie.
Hey, Jim, was there any specifics on the James Blackstone, what they cut out of it?
I was not at that committee meeting. One of the things that I heard, and again, I'm sort of as an observer of the debate on the floor, was that in terms of some of their contracts, I think a question came up as to when the last time they had tested the market on some of those contracts, like maintenance contracts and things like that. And so based on that, they thought that they might be able to do a little bit better. So, I don't know, is that a faithful representation? That's kind of what I heard at the meeting. So that would be an example. And again, Charlie, I want to underscore that the number was actually higher than that, but, there was I guess in a spirit of compromise, which is supposed to happen at a legislative body, that, they came up with a different number, and that's what they did, so.
How about the specifics on a contingency reduction?
I'd have to go back to my notes. I do know that part of it was the primary, so that's probably roughly $28,000, $30,000. And then the other is, there's just, the contingency. Here's kind of how the contingency debate goes, and it's one of those debates that's it's probably more art than science because it's philosophical, right? So I could put a case together and say I think we should have a contingency of X, and here's the components of it. But I can't prove with any certainty that that's how it's going to go down, because by its very nature, it's a contingent account. Now, there are some things you can make very reasonable assumptions in that number. For example, unsettled labor contracts would be a perfect example of that. I was okay with amounts that were duplicated, like the primary, but on the other, in terms of the elements of that, whether it's related to the regular contingency, which is stuff that no one can predict how much snow we're going to have, where legal fees will end up, because again, we typically have been keeping those flat, but as I've said over my 20 years when we've done transfers to legal budgets, they're response driven. Okay, somebody sues the town has to defend it. And tax appeals. So now we have been working with the assessor and the attorney, Tim Perito, that works on tax appeals, trying to bring some more certainty to that, because we know each year that they go on, there's a compounding effect. Now, we do account for that in other ways, in addition to contingency, but again, so those are some of the elements to it. For example, the change the Board of Finance made as it related to the fire department, that was not a factor in this. So if you were thinking it might have been related to that, it's not. So I think it was basically the registrar of voters, some trimming of some of the other things, and just, how much risk do you want to take? How much do you think do you want to offset with contingency? So.
Okay. I get it. Thanks.
Okay. Other questions on this topic? Okay, so we're going to go to item number 15, which is to set the mill rate for fiscal year 18 and 19. And I'll provide the highlights and then turn it over to Jim. Again, he's provided a worksheet here that shows the original Board of Finance, request to the Board of Finance, the Board of Finance numbers that were recommended to the RTM, and the RTM final numbers. So as we know, there was minor changes on the town side of $106,581. So that number was $54,817,528, combined with the Board of Ed numbers of $57,262,843, gave you a total expenditures of $112,080,371. And then Jim has provided the revenues, which are
unchanged.
Unchanged, thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Which then totals the tax requirements of $99,382,869, and less the state adjustments and reimbursements, total tax levy of $101,718,000 at the collection rate of 98.35, which is consistent. Grand list of similar to what we had before, $3,551,399 gives us a mill rate of 28.64, which is a 1.3. What is that, Jim?
So it's a mill rate of 28.64. So it's basically
0.6 of 1%.
Correct.
So it's less than a 1% increase from the prior year.
So it's $60 on a $10,000 tax bill.
Jim, you want to, anything else that I missed on this?
No, I think you covered it well. I think So I was trying to follow on. I think you read the resolution, right? At the bottom of the letter?
I did not yet.
Okay.
Thank
Oh, I'm
you.
sorry, okay.
That's okay. So with that and the coaching from Mr. Finch, we'll say, resolved that the Board of Finance establishes a mill rate for fiscal year 2018-19 at 28.64 mills pursuant to the budget adopted by the representative town meeting.
I'll move that resolution.
Been moved by Victor.
Second.
Seconded by Bob, got in there first. Discussion, other comments, Jim, or?
No.
Or Mr. First Selectman? You're good? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you to everyone, and with no further, again, thanks to Jim and the Finance Department and the RTM for concluding a good budget year, and Jamie, your leadership. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, Joe.
Moved and seconded by Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
The preceding program was brought to you through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.